Hi everyone, here's the latest installment in my film series on films that were released in 1973, 40 years ago, the year I was born. I've got, of course, an open invitation for any of you who want to recommend more of my 1973 movies. There's a playlist link in the description below. You can look at all the films that I've done already and recommend new ones if you want to. I've got a long list of films that I'd like to get through, and so I'm trying to make as many of these as possible, sort of keep up with the pace. Today's this film for this installment is going to be Badlands, which is a film that I hadn't seen until just this morning. I'd actually started watching it some years ago, but really didn't like it that much, so I quit. But this time I watched it all the way through. It's the first film directed by Terrence Malick. Was also written and produced by him. And I figured it was based on a true story based on the structure, but there is no credit for it. And as it turns out, looking at the Wikipedia page, it's loosely based on Charles Starkweather, who was went on a murder spree in the late 50s. This film, I believe, takes place in the early 60s. Martin Sheen, young Martin Sheen from Apocalypse Now, and a lot of other stuff, plays the Starkweather character. His name is Kit, right? I'm having a hard time. Yeah, that's right, Kit. And Sissy Spacek is Holly, the girl, the 15-year-old girl that he strikes up a relationship with and drags her out of her father's house and on the road to live in a nomadic existence, and occasionally having to kill people that discover them along the way. Because when they leave her father's house, they end up killing him and setting the whole place on fire in an attempt to cover their crime. So yeah, when I was watching this movie, I was reminded a lot of True Romance, of course, and I think that True Romance took some inspiration from this film, particularly in regards to the narration and the score. The narration is done by Sissy Spacek, and I would presume, this is the impression that I got from watching the movie, that the story, as it's known, was told by the woman who's involved with Starkweather, Carol Ann Fugate. But of course, this is a fictional version of that. But you wouldn't know it to watch it. It really does play like kind of a true life story that's been messed with in a minimal way. Because most of what we see of what Kit does, the Martin Sheen character, is through the eyes of the Sissy Spacek character. And when the two of them are separated towards the end, what we see mostly is of him encountering other people, basically, a guy at a gas station, cops, what have you. And the accounts of all what took place could have been taken from them rather than from him. So I sort of got the impression that it was inspired by a true story, perhaps very faithfully. But again, it's not. It's a fictionalized version, so there isn't any sort of official adaptation of an actual true story that they acknowledge. So as I said, basically, the character of Kit is kind of a ne'er-do-well. He's not really motivated career-wise or anything like that. Apparently he comes from the wrong side of the tracks. He's a bad sort, and Spacek's father really doesn't want her associating with him. So he comes into their house one day and packs up her suitcase for her, and when the father and his daughter arrive home, he shoots the father and says, "Okay, let's take off now." Which they do. They live alone for a while. They set up a little makeshift camp for themselves. At one point they find some wealthy man and stay in his house for about a day. But they're pretty much on their own, and when people catch up to them and catch on to where they are and what have you, they have to, escape. And, he ends up shooting a couple of people here and there along the way, rather unpleasantly. As the story progresses, there's a big manhunt for them. It's funny, I was actually reminded of what happened in Boston last week, because the reports that I read is that they basically shut down the whole city. They told everyone to stay home. They said businesses should stay closed. No one should be out in the streets while the cops are scouring the entire city looking for these two brothers that they caught on video planting the bombs. And it was sort of a similar situation in this film, whereby the newspaper and the radio are talking about, hey, everyone needs to stay in their homes, and because there's this whole manhunt going on across South Dakota and these other states, Montana and what have you, looking for these people, and they ended up shooting some people, but not causing huge amounts of mass destruction. But they took the incident very seriously, of course. So as far as Malick goes, I've seen all of his movies except for two. I've not seen Days of Heaven with Richard Gere, and I've not seen the most recent film, which just opened here last week, which is To the Wonder with Ben Affleck and Rachel McAdams. And I really wasn't planning on seeing To the Wonder because, based on what I've read and what I've seen about it, it looks terrible. It looks like The Tree of Life with less plot, if that was possible. And from what I've read, Ben Affleck hardly has any dialogue at all. I don't know how you establish a character all that well if the guy never even speaks. It's all just through body language or just, I don't know. I might end up seeing it just because, it's nice to see a film like that in the theater because the photography is so good. But I saw the trailer, it really looked annoying. Days of Heaven I'd like to get around to seeing eventually. But the only film that I could really say that I liked of Terrence Malick's is The Thin Red Line, which came out in 1998. The New World I've seen so long and so bored by that, it just was a real drag of a movie. The Tree of Life I liked better, I found it interesting. But there was a lot of stuff in it that just was totally inexplicable and I didn't get. Who knows, I might like To the Wonder more. I'm sure I'll like Days of Heaven more. But from what I've read, his most straightforward movies, his most straightforward story-driven movies, rather than movies that are just driven by a lot of poetic imagery, are Badlands and The Thin Red Line. Although The Thin Red Line kind of trails off in a different direction once they, there's another hour of that movie left to go after they actually accomplish, the platoon basically accomplishes what they need to accomplish. They take the airport in Japan. I think, oh God, it's been so long since I've seen that movie. Oh, excuse me. I have a little trouble getting myself together for some of these sometimes. Did I like this movie? Overall, sure. I could have done without it. I need to take a second here just to look and see who recommended this to me. Badlands. Benway 20 and 99 Filmo, both of them asked me to take a look at this. And I probably would have anyway, just because it's such a well-regarded movie. I say that a lot, well-regarded movies. That's mostly what they are, especially from like 40 years ago, if it's not an exploitation classic. Even exploitation movies are well-regarded now because they're vintage. Yeah. Sissy Spacek had some really, really strange narration at the beginning of this movie. She was talking about how her mother died when she was just a kid, and afterwards her father donated the wedding cake to someone that worked for him. The wedding cake that he had kept in a freezer for 10 years. Now let me get this straight. They get married, and instead of eating the wedding cake, they put it in the freezer, where it stays until after his wife dies, and his daughter is like 7, 8 years old or something like that, and then they take the wedding cake out and they give it to someone that worked for them. What is that all about? And then she talks about how at 10 years old, she and her father are still kind of strangers to each other, or she's a stranger to him. And that really isn't explained all that much. But then again, Terrence Malick isn't really one for explaining stuff. He'll give you lots of shots of trees and fish and animals roaming around and the sky and clouds and vast stretches of nature. But he doesn't explain a whole lot. And he just sort of lets things play out as they are and sort of observes things from a distance without getting in too close, it would seem. Yeah, his films are oftentimes inscrutable, and this is one of them. And, speaking of True Romance, the xylophone theme from True Romance has there's another theme in this movie that's very, very similar to it. I'm getting this a lot from not only this movie and High Plains Drifter, but also I think I mentioned on another Western. Come on, think. It was the one, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. I'm comparing to the movies that came out decades later, but I'm treating the ones that I saw then as sort of like the originals, whereas they weren't. You know, stuff that came out in the 90s, of course, was after 73, but I still tend to look at that as like, oh, that 1973 is ripping off that movie from the 90s? No, it's not like that, but that's how it feels sometimes. So like I said, if there's other 1973 movies you would like me to take a look at and make a video on, the playlist for my 1973 series is in the description below. You can take a look and see what I've done so far, and recommend something else. I've got a good long list of pictures left to do, including a lot of different cult items as well as classic films. There's many, many to see, and hopefully I can find them all on disc at some point or another. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again real soon. Take it easy.